So we're in the middle of this situation with the allegations against Mike Bickle at IHOPKC, and I'm here with Dean Briggs, John Chisholm. The acronym ELT, or Executive Leadership Team at IHOP, has been brought to the fore. And you guys were both part of the Executive Leadership Team for the past number of years and have recently stepped off. John, can you explain what led to you making that decision?
Sure. No, I appreciate you asking. I 2013 moved to Kansas City to come be a part of it. 2014 ended up coming on to the ELT in my different roles of leadership on the base. You know, my relationship with Mike goes all the way back 1989, 1990, 1991. I'm a vineyard pastor as the prophetic sweeps through the vineyard and Mike's relationship with the vineyard. So there's depth to all that. Member of the ELT. What's been transpiring, it's closing in on 3 years, 2.5 years. I've been involved with a gentleman who was a department leader for us, who all of a sudden found himself in trouble as it relates to his marriage coming apart. But part of the challenge was Mike's son was involved with the woman. And so then trying to help him manage his heart, but then trying to, like how IHOP handled it, how Mike handled it. And so the husband comes to me and makes an appeal, would I go with him to see Mike? And so I'm willing to do that and appeal to Mike and say, hey, we want to come and talk to you about how this is all being handled, given that your son's involved. And Mike was unwilling to meet with the two of us. He ended up, meeting with me one-on-one, was willing to meet with the husband one-on-one. And that conversation I had with Mike, didn't get anywhere. It was a very, I don't know. I sort of stopped it at the end of a half hour because I wasn't getting anywhere in terms of him understanding what's really happening and my hope about how he would get involved. And so again, we're talking about over a 2.5 year period, this keeps unfolding. All of a sudden, about 6 months ago, we find out that the relationship, after 4 years is still happening. There's 2 families completely destroyed out of the process. And so my frustration ended up with conversations with Stuart relative to, hey, I'm not okay with how this is happening. Those got a little bit, strained conversations. On the third one, it was like, I'm really not okay with this. And it's like his challenge back to me was, you have no idea what Mike is doing as it relates to this. You have no idea what I'm doing. And my pushback was, that's my point. Nobody knows. And so I just wanted to read this. This is the letter I sent to Mike and copied to the ELT. This is a very difficult email to write. There is so much dancing around in my heart. Here's the most important point I would like to make. You have created a culture that has embraced a do not talk approach to difficult conversations and church discipline. The do not talk rule is what people see most in dysfunctional families. I believe our ELT is a dysfunctional family, not able to talk about the problems around us because it would be gossip for them to be discussed. I believe a healthy elder group would be able to talk about the crisis, discuss the best way to approach the challenge to redeem, heal, and restore and implement discipline if necessary. Mike, your approach of I will only talk to one-on-one, your approach that I will not discuss with you, John, what I'm doing or what I have done, Stuart challenging me that there is so much that I do not know that is going on, but it cannot be discussed with me because that would be gossip. All of that empowers a world where 3.5 years into the process and we still have a disaster on our hands. The elder group has never discussed the topic. The elder group has never been informed of the problem. The elder group has never spoken into direction about the best way to handle it. Only do not talk. It's gossip. Mike, there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. You are avoiding the elder group, bringing wisdom to what needs to be done. The letter's longer than that, but that was the heart of the appeal. And because of that, I just decided to step away. I was not comfortable with how the ELT was managing this situation that had gone on. Okay, so September 5th is when this is all unfolding. Dean's gonna step in about September 7th. On September 11th, Jane Doe reaches out to me and asks to sit down with me and shares the whole story. Again, so what so many other people are saying, that's not possible is my response. Mike's brand is so powerful. Brand is language in my consulting practice that we use all the time. How people view him, see him, what he believes, how he lives. It was so powerful that my ability to process what she was saying. But over time, like it just got in. It's just unbelievable what's transpired. And so I'm thankful the Lord got me out of the ELT as this is all unfolded. So.
Dean, September 7th.
Yeah, it's actually not September 7th. It was a couple days later for us that I submitted my own resignation, but I'll back up a little bit. I had felt like when I joined the ELT in November, December of 2018 that I was on a 3 to 5 year assignment. At the end of 2021, I felt like the Lord had made it clear that my assignment was ending and that I would take 2022 and phase out. I brought that to Stuart and Mike, and they asked me to just stay on, even in a minimal way, continue to be a part of the ELT, and travel, do what I needed, but continue to advise. Well, shortly after that, a member of the advocate group came to me, and it wasn't the advocate group at the time, it was just a friend. And they said, would you be willing to hear something that we're very concerned about? And we aren't getting answers from IHOP about this. And they told, this was within just a few weeks of that period in 2021, they told this story that John is referring to about an affair that Mike's son was having and the really, really questionable handling of that. Pastorally, a Matthew 18 process that had gone bad in multiple ways. And I listened, and so the issue is that department leader was actually in my department. I was head of messaging at the time, and he was in my department, and I was grieved to realize that this is someone under my care that I've never heard this story about. I had actually watched him deteriorate in his duties, in his capacity. He had become more sporadic. He wasn't showing up to work on time. He was obviously stressed and distracted. And so I, for a period of weeks, had tried to engage him around job performance. Is everything okay? What's going on? And he talked about trying to get his consulting business going, and finally said, I'm having some trouble in my marriage, would you pray? But he never said what it was. So then I attempt to resign. I'm convinced they make it easy for me to stay on in a provisional way. And then I find out that this husband is going through this crisis. So I call him and say, please talk to me about this. We go out for barbecue, 2-hour conversation, 3-hour conversation. He finally lays out the whole thing. My heart is broken. And part of it, really honestly, was I wanted to assure him, I've never heard this story. I don't know why the ELT hasn't been informed, but I didn't want him thinking that I, as his boss or supervisor or whatever, was just silently watching him go through what he was going through and not caring about it or trying to address it. So I got the information straight from him. I went straight to Mike and Stuart at the time, and the process began for me in a very similar way to what John is describing. I was told there's, 2 sides to this story. There's actually 4 sides. There's multiple guilty parties. Everyone has issues. There isn't actually sufficient evidence. They were confronted. The affair had stopped, and nothing else was going on. People were changing. It's complicated. There's stuff you don't know. And both Mike and Stuart told me the same story. There's stuff you don't know. And I felt like, having talked to the husband, talked to Mike, and talked to Stuart, the fact is, there was stuff I didn't know. And if they were involved in it at the level they said they were, human relationships are complicated, it's tricky. I felt like, okay, at least they're in the mix. Honestly, personally, my wife and I, we were just grieving for Mike and Diane as parents in, watching their own son go through these kind of mistakes and choices. And we felt like the wise thing would have been for Mike to recuse himself, at the time not knowing more, recuse himself from the ELT's involvement on this. And within 6 months to a year, I get the principle I was told was you don't adjudicate a private sin in a public setting. Okay, good. But there's about 5 other biblical principles that hold that principle in tension. And the ELT, as the highest governing board of the mission base, was never read into this situation. And I don't care how complicated, how pastorally nuanced, how difficult it is, the fact that Mike's son was engaged in this sinful activity and 2 lives are being destroyed, 2 families are being destroyed, both having ended in divorce now, and not even realizing how long it had been going on then. And over the next period for me of about 15 to 18 months, it's still going on and still going on, and nothing is being resolved. The ELT should have been read into that early in the process, and to find out that this culture of silence and the engagement only on a need-to-know basis. When I finally chose to resign, I still didn't know about the allegations against Mike. A period of a couple of weeks of really intense activity led to, we're in Ohio at my son's wedding. John, for the first time, he sends a letter to the whole ELT. He didn't read it here, but it's part of his resignation letter. And in it, he simply said, the black horse isn't gossip, it's perversion, and I'm not okay with this. The way this situation has been handled between these 2 couples, the silence, the appearance of cover-up, and the issues related to that, it's not okay pastorally, it's not okay organizationally, it's not okay managerially. And I held up the phone to my wife. We're at our son's reception after his wedding, and I'm like, Jeannie, what do you feel about this? And we both were struck to the quick. I had allowed myself for 15 to 18 months to be caught up in the fog of the nuance of all the moral ambiguities and the process ambiguities and the Matthew 18 double talk and the way evidence wasn't considered evidence and the degree to which this was made unresolvable and kept private from the ELT. That was the first time those names and that situation in 4 years had ever been mentioned to the ELT. And it just became shockingly clear. The elephant has finally been named in the room, and we aren't okay with this. I wrote a 4-page resignation letter. I read it personally to Mike and Stuart. At the time, I reinforced my own belief and confidence in their individual integrity and that they were trying to do the right thing, but I made it clear in no uncertain terms that pastorally and procedurally, this is a disaster. There is a scandal here that looks like a cover-up, and this has not been handled well and will come back to bite IHOP, and I implored them to do something about this and handle it differently. But I basically resigned saying, I have tried to stand on the inside with you, but I don't know how to stand on the inside when I am intentionally kept on the outside. I turned in my resignation. I wrote a 2-page letter, a shorter version of that same letter to give to the entire ELT with about 3 very strong warning dreams that had been given to me that were incredibly sobering. And I told Stuart, I'm going to print these and give them to the ELT. He said, actually I said I'm going to email them to the whole ELT. He said, there's a risk that could be sent out in a way that won't be helpful. Would you please just print those and give them to me, and I will bring it to an ELT gathering and make sure they all know. To this day, I don't think that ever happened. The same kind of process of siloing people into sideline conversations to control the narrative and manage access to information. To my knowledge, all that ever happened, I followed up with Stuart and a couple of other members of the ELT. What I was told was that Stuart told each of them individually, Dean's resigned, his letter is on file. Well, that doesn't say anything about the nature of the resignation, the subject matter of the concerns or the dreams of warning. I don't know that any of the ELT ever saw it. So I resigned, and 6 days later, I am read into this. I'm told, Dean, what we thought was a significant issue is now just the tip of the iceberg. There are women coming forward with allegations against Mike. When I was told what those allegations were, I told Dwayne in particular, I said, if I'm going to be a part of this, I need to speak to each of them individually. I wanted my own 1 Timothy 5 process. I'm not going to accept your word. I need to know how these allegations emerged, and I need to ascertain the credibility of them for myself. I spoke to the husband of, I already knew the story of the husband his marriage has been destroyed as a result of this. And the truth is that Mike had 6 years of very questionable interaction with his wife prior to Mike's son having an affair with his wife. So that man, in double fashion, was destroyed by Mike's influence on his wife and his son's affair with his wife. That's a problem. And then I went to the main Jane Doe, and then with permission from the third person who, in the document that was presented, there were 3 that were willing to list their allegations and concerns, and each of them gave an impact statement. And I went to the third, who I don't have a personal relationship with, but she gave permission to her counselor to verify to me. I got my 3 confirmations, and now here we are as an advocate group. John and I are in this story because all of us in the advocate group, this is not an official assembling of around a conspiratorial effort to accomplish something that we predetermined we wanted to do. That's outrageous. None of us have anything to gain. None of us have anything to gain from seeing a significant hero in all of our lives face this kind of public scrutiny over sins that he has committed over decades. If there was any way on God's green earth that this could have happened differently, I would have explored every possible option. I wrote a letter to Mike on the 26th of November appealing to him, Mike, please do not continue down this path. You know where this is going. You know it is a fabrication of the Matthew 18 process that you are clinging to in the midst of this by refusing to meet with 2 to say that it is illegally proceeding in public fashion. I appealed to him to come forward. He did not respond. He's got his lawyer. He's doing this the way he sees fit. But I believe that the advocate group, what has been called the advocate group, this is just a group of brothers and leaders and sisters in the body of Christ that found themselves confronted with 3 stories none of us wanted to hear that arose in spontaneous and uncoordinated fashion by victims who each thought they were alone in their own story. But as Dwayne said early on, once you hear these stories, you can't unhear them.
I do have a question regards to your resignation. Both of you have just said that you went to Mike and Stuart, and yet I'm confused because the story that we're being told now is Mike has not even been on staff for the past 3 years. Could you speak to that?
Mike was at every ELT meeting, and so there is, I don't have all my exact dates right, a decision was made by the ELT to stop the board that was in place. I think this is 2020, and so we could get the exact dates on it. But a conversation, Mike's going to come under attack as it relates to the woke and the left, as it relates to gender, sexuality. He's being a very strong spokesperson, standing with Israel. And so what we need to do is isolate him, take all title and all that if they go after him and sue him, they won't impact the
idea was a firewall
between
him and the organization.
So the board is disbanded. we step away from the agreement we had with the Evangelical Association of how finances are handled.
ECFA.
And again, why would you allow that? I look back now, but the issue is, again, his brand is so strong, he doesn't need the accountability, and so I go along with that. And so the board's disbanded. And so, yeah, Mike was at every ELT meeting. Mike's voice is by far the dominant voice on the mission base. Mike is at every worship leaders meeting almost in terms of when they gather. Mike is in any significant place where there's very significant topics, Mike's voice. And so in as much as he's formally all that, practically, he's never let go of the hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah, the issue to me that I have found myself, and I think we've all found ourselves doing, is once the fog even slightly lifts, you look back and you see things that were always there, but you didn't see it at the time. And so dots start to connect, and once the dots connect, you can't unconnect them. And so that decision that was made, actually the board disbanded. That decision was announced to the ELT, if I'm recalling correctly, because the board made that decision separate from the ELT. It was communicated to the ELT, and here's why. Set up a firewall. Mike was going to engage in more and more controversial conversations, and there needed to be a firewall of lawsuits in case lawsuits came against him, that it didn't touch the organization. And so in the process of that, I believe the 501c3 was reclassified under Forerunner as a church instead of Forerunner being under IHOP as a religious organization, because that allowed certain other additional protections in terms of the way those things are structured at the federal level. And it also allowed the ELT to become more the government than the board. And all of that was ostensibly presented as we're moving into more and more intense days with all kinds of social metric pressure and messaging pressure from outside forces, and this is necessary for us to maintain the purity of the movement. Looking back now, the problem is that timing was right when the intensity, roughly the first year of his son's affair, was heating up, which none of us knew, except a couple. The ELT was read in one person at a time. If I had not been told and gone to them, I don't think to this day I would have ever known, because it was only on a need-to-know basis. And now I look back, some of those dots, I was outside walking with Mike one day in the back parking lot, because sometimes when he wanted to talk, we've all done it, you pace. And this was before I knew the situation. Any of this, before I had tried to resign, and I saw the husband who was going through this challenge. I hadn't yet met with him. I didn't yet know his story, but I was concerned for him because I'd seen his work deteriorate. He was leaving. He was walking out to his car. I'm walking with Mike, and I yell at him, say, "Hey," I'm not going to say his name. I yell, say, "Hey, how you doing? You doing okay? Let's get together sometime soon. I'm just trying to stay involved in his life." He gets in his car, drives away. Mike and I keep walking, but Mike shifts the conversation. He says, "So yeah, I know he works for you, but are you aware of what's happening?" I said, I just know he just recently told me his marriage is in trouble, and I'm just trying to stay connected and involved to help him. And this is one of those things, I didn't know it. I didn't know that it mattered. But Mike said to me, "You know what? He and I have a special relationship. Why don't you just let me work with him? You don't need to worry about it." Great. I mean, the man I admire, the man who has more wisdom, more integrity, great. If you're going to be that invested and involved, please keep the process going, help. And I took my hands off of it. Then I found out the issue. Then I went to he and Stewart. Then I got the circle. And I just held on to that. Even then I thought, that is a strange thing to say to me in light of what I am finding out. And by the time it was all unraveled and the implications of Mike's own relationship with that man's wife, And where it has gone since, there are too many dots to connect at this point that are suggestive, circumstantial, and secondary, but they still matter in the total picture of what is unfolding.
So when I resigned, I was not aware that any board existed. So that's in early September. You know, it's come up now that there's a board in place and all that, and where it appeared and when it appeared. When I resigned, I was not familiar
And in terms
with
of
it.
the official documentation of that board, as I understand, there were 3 or 4 listed, and there's 9 now, and most of them have been added within the last few weeks.
That's what it seems like. The one last point, just for me, is I think there's some discussion related to the advocate group and the ELT, that the ELT is like willing to have this investigation as long as there's a fence around it related to only does Mike get investigated. And yet the situation we're talking about, it's much broader, you know. The Mike's relationship with the husband's, you know, the husband's wife in this, the unhealth in that relationship over a 4-year period is just staggering. And it's a part, I mean, he's a victim as much as the other Jane Does are victims relative to what's happening. And that just, we're gonna just isolate like this one point out when the ash is, it's woven into so much stuff.
Well, that's actually an important point. Part of the reason John and I are where we are and what we're doing is because as the most recent the advocate group is made up of all former ELT members spanning 20 plus years. People with a lot more history than John and I, but John and I are the most recent 2 members of the ELT with the most recent series of events to observe. And the sad thing is that particular incident becomes a proxy that's almost a proof case of how things get handled or not handled or mishandled, and the way it's explained away, and this kind of biblical rhetoric that is applied so that even in the reporting of these events, what I have seen over and over is statements that are technically true and entirely misleading. And that has become a way to manage the narrative. And the ELT is actually encouraged in how we lead, because there's always crisis, there's always managerial issues. And part of how you succeed at the ELT level is proving effective in managing narrative so that you can go in when there's an issue and there's a blow up, a relational thing or whatever, or there's an offense or a complaint, and you manage the narrative to get everyone to dial down their concern and to stay in a compliant Sermon on the Mount lifestyle. I get it. I appreciate that value, but I think it has been applied in a controlling and manipulative way to the point that the whole culture is infected with it.